Get your hand off my chair before I break it. Amara Chidinma did not look up when she said it. She was too busy glaring at the email on her phone, the one that had just informed her that the Kong Logistics chairmanship shortlist would be announced in 6 weeks, and that the board was strongly leaning toward candidates who demonstrate complete personal stability. Personal stability. As if her quarterly numbers weren't stable enough. As if the 3 new shipping routes she'd opened through Busan weren't proof enough that she could run a company. I was here first, the man said, not moving his hand from the back of the chair at all. Amara finally looked up. He was Korean, mid-30s maybe, with the kind of composed face that made you want to slap it just to see if it could crack. He had a leather folder tucked under one arm and a coffee in the other hand, and he was looking at her like she was a mildly interesting inconvenience. This is the only open table in Suwon at 8 in the morning, she said. I have a meeting in 11 minutes. I need this table more than you need it. I have a meeting in 9 minutes, he said. So mathematically, I need it more. That's not how math works. It's exactly how math works. She set her bag down hard on the table anyway, daring him to object. He didn't move. Neither did she. For 3 full seconds they simply stood there, 2 strangers refusing to blink first over a 4-top table in a coffee shop on Maehyang-aro, completely unaware that this exact spot would, in less than a year, become the place they told their grandchildren they first met. Though if you'd told either of them that in this moment, they would have laughed in your face, or thrown coffee at you. Possibly both. Fine, Amara said. We share it. You stay on that side. I stay on this side. We do not speak. Agreed. It lasted 4 minutes. In minute 5, Amara reached for the little jar of sugar packets at the center of the table at the exact moment he reached for the same jar, and her elbow caught his cup, and the entire contents of his Americano went directly onto the open folder in front of him. For a moment there was total silence. Then he made a sound like a man watching his house burn down. Are you serious right now? It was an accident. This is a presentation for the Suwon Architectural Review Board, he said, lifting the soaked papers like they were a wounded animal. 3 months of work. Do you understand what coffee does to ink? Do you understand what an apology looks like? Because you haven't tried one. You spilled coffee on my career and you want an apology from me? I want you to stop yelling at me like I did it on purpose. It's a coffee shop. Things spill. That's what coffee shops are for. Coffee shops are for coffee. Not chaos. Well, clearly you've never met me. I would like to keep it that way. She grabbed napkins from the dispenser and started dabbing at the folder without asking, which somehow made him angrier, because now she was touching his ruined documents with her ruined napkins, making an already ruined situation worse, and he snatched the folder back so fast that the last few napkins tore in her hand. I was helping, she said. You were making it worse. You're welcome, by the way. For what? For not spilling it on you. I have excellent aim. Consider yourself lucky. He stared at her. She stared back. And then, because the universe has a sense of humor, his phone rang, and hers rang at almost the exact same second, and they both stepped back from each other to answer, still glaring, like 2 boxers retreating to opposite corners. This isn't over, he muttered, already walking toward the door with his ruined folder under his arm. It was never started, she called after him. Try a lid next time. They were invented for a reason. He didn't turn around. She didn't expect him to. And as far as she was concerned, that was the end of the most irritating 7 minutes of her week, and she would never have to think about the rude man with the ruined folder again. She was wrong. Spectacularly wrong. 3 days later, Amara walked into the Gyeonggi business leaders mixer at the Suwon Convention Hall wearing the kind of dress that said I belong here, even though, that morning, she had cried in her car for 11 minutes after another investor called her impressive for someone in her position in a tone that made the compliment feel like an apology. Her family's company, Chidinma Logistics Africa, had a Korean expansion office in Suwon, and the chairmanship of the parent board back home hinged on this exact kind of room. Old money. Old men. Old rules dressed up in new lighting. She was 3 glasses of sparkling water deep into pretending to enjoy herself when she heard a voice behind her say something in Korean to another man, something about ridiculous spills and the worst Tuesday of my professional life, and she turned around already knowing, somehow, exactly who she would see. Him. Mr. Coffee Folder. In a tailored navy suit this time, looking significantly less damp and significantly more smug, holding a glass of wine like he'd never once been wronged by a woman with bad elbow control. He saw her at the same moment. His face did something complicated, surprise, recognition, then a kind of pained resignation, like a man realizing fate had a very specific sense of humor and he was the punchline. You, he said. Me, she agreed. Did you get the stains out? No. Did you get a lid? I bought 4. Smart man. You're stalking me, he said, though there was the faintest, most reluctant curve at the corner of his mouth, like his face was fighting him on the seriousness of the accusation. I have never been less interested in stalking anyone in my life, she said. This is a business event. I'm a businesswoman. Conducting business. At a mixer. That's where business mixes. He almost laughed. She watched him swallow it back down, like laughing at her would be a defeat of some kind, and honestly, fair enough, because she was fighting the exact same urge. Ji-Hoon Kong, he said finally, extending a hand like a peace offering, or possibly a trap. Amara Chidinma, she said, shaking it. Try not to spill anything on me. That implies I spilled the first time. You did that. We're not doing this again. Agreed. They both meant it. They both broke that agreement within 2 minutes, because a server walked past with a tray of small appetizers and Ji-Hoon reached for one at the exact moment Amara did, and their hands collided over a single remaining spring roll, and they both froze, and then both pulled back at once, and then both reached again at once, like some cursed reflex neither of them could control. Take it, he said. No, you take it. I insist. I insist more. This is the dumbest argument I've had all week, and I argued with a coffee table on Tuesday. That coffee table was me, Amara said, and frankly I won that argument. This time he did laugh, a short surprised bark of a sound like it had escaped before he could stop it, and something about hearing it, about being the reason for it, made Amara feel an unexpected and deeply unwelcome flicker of warmth in her chest, which she immediately filed away under absolutely not and never again. They drifted apart for the rest of the event, professionally, the way 2 people who'd just met are supposed to. But Suwon's business circle was small, smaller than either of them wanted to admit, and within the hour they found themselves seated at the same round table for the evening's program, separated only by a centerpiece of white orchids and a stranger's untouched plate of bulgogi. It was during the keynote, a painfully long speech about supply chain resilience, that Amara, half listening, half scrolling through investor emails under the table, overheard the man 2 seats down from Ji-Hoon lean in and say quietly, "How is your grandmother? Still in the hospital?" Ji-Hoon's whole posture changed. Amara noticed it the way you notice a light flicker in a room, small, but impossible to unsee. She's stable, he said, voice lower now, stripped of all the playful edge from earlier. The doctors say weeks. Maybe less. She keeps asking when I'm going to bring home a wife so she can see it before he stopped himself. Before. The other man made a sympathetic sound. You should just find someone. Anyone. Make her happy. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Old women don't care about love stories, Ji-Hoon. They care about grandchildren and weddings and someone to hold their hand. Find a nice woman, marry her, let her die happy. Amara, who had absolutely not meant to be listening, found that she had stopped breathing slightly. There was something about the rawness in his voice that didn't match the polished, irritating man who'd yelled at her about a coffee stain. This was a different version of him. A tired one. A scared one. She looked away fast when he glanced up, pretending to be deeply fascinated by her water glass. 20 minutes later, during the networking break, her own crisis found its way into the open air when her cousin Toriro, who worked for the family company and had insisted on tagging along for moral support, which really meant gossip support, leaned across the table with zero subtlety whatsoever. "Did you hear back from the board?" "Don't," Amara warned. "That bad? They want demonstrated personal stability." "Do you know what that means?" "It means a husband. It means a ring. It means some 60-year-old man and soul deciding my entire career depends on whether I have someone to come home to." "That's insane." "That's the entire industry, apparently." "So what are you going to do?" "I don't know, Toriro." "Rent one? Do you know anyone selling a husband? Gently used, low mileage, available for 6 weeks of family events?" She said it loudly enough, bitterly enough, dramatically enough, that 3 people at the next table turned to look, and one of them was Ji-Hoon, who had drifted closer during the break without either of them noticing, holding a fresh glass of wine and wearing an expression like a man who had just watched a door open directly in front of him. Their eyes met. Amara felt her stomach drop in the specific way it does when you realize someone heard something they absolutely should not have heard. Before she could explain, apologize, or flee, the older man beside Ji-Hoon, the same one who'd told him to marry anyone, clapped his hands together with delight and said, loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Well, there you go. You two clearly already know each other. Why don't you just marry each other and solve both your problems?" He laughed like it was the best joke he'd told all year. A few others laughed politely along with him, the way people do at events like this, already moving on to the next conversation, the next drink, the next forgettable joke. But Amara wasn't laughing. And neither was Ji-Hoon. They stood there, 6 feet apart, both very deliberately not looking at each other, both privately doing the kind of math that should never be done at a business mixer involving wine and orchids and a dying grandmother and a chairmanship vote, and both arriving, horrifyingly, at the same impossible number. It was, without question, the worst idea either of them had ever heard. Which was exactly why, 3 days later, they were sitting across from each other at a much quieter table, this time with no coffee in sight, seriously discussing it. The second meeting happened at a tea house tucked into a quiet alley off Paldleman, chosen specifically because neither of them wanted to be seen together in public twice in 1 week. The kind of decision 2 people make when they're already worried about appearances and haven't even agreed to anything yet. "I want to be clear," Amara said, before he'd even finished sitting down, "that I think this is insane. I agree completely. I don't even like you. The feeling is mutual. You yelled at me about a coffee stain. You ruined 3 months of architectural work. It was a folder, not your firstborn. It felt like my firstborn." She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully landed and turned it into a sip of tea instead. "So why are we here?" she said. Ji-Hoon set his cup down carefully, the same precise way he seemed to do everything, and for the first time since she'd met him, the irritation dropped out of his face entirely, replaced by something tired and plain and honest. "Because my grandmother raised me," he said. "Both my parents died when I was 9. Car accident. She took me in, raised me alone in a house she could barely afford, worked at a fish market in Suwon for 11 years so I could go to architecture school. And now she's dying, and the only thing she has ever asked me for, the only thing, in 26 years, is to see me married before she goes." Amara was quiet for a moment. "And you don't have anyone?" "I have buildings," he said. "I have deadlines. I have a firm with my name on the door. I do not have a girlfriend, a fiancé, or any prospects whatsoever, and I am not going to manufacture a real relationship in 6 weeks just to satisfy a hospital deadline I can't control." "So you want a fake one instead?" "I want her to die happy," he said simply. "That's all. I don't care how it looks to anyone else." It landed harder than Amara expected. She thought of her own mother, of the version of family pressure she lived with, ruthless, transactional, dressed up in spreadsheets and shortlists instead of hospital rooms, and found, to her great annoyance, that she understood him completely. My situation isn't nearly as touching, she admitted. Nobody's dying. I just stand to lose the biggest opportunity of my career because a room full of men in Seoul think a single woman can't be trusted to run a logistics empire without a husband validating her life choices. That's disgusting. That's business, she said. Apparently. So we're both being blackmailed by the concept of marriage. Basically. He looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that wasn't romantic at all, just calculating, weighing, the look of two people doing very serious math. A contract, he said finally. 3 months. Public wedding, photographs, family appearances. At the end, a quiet divorce. No romance. No expectations. No complications. And if either of us starts catching feelings, Amara said, only half joking, we shoot the other one on sight. Agreed in principle. I'm serious about the contract part, though. I want everything in writing. Boundaries. Compensation for your time, since you're doing me a favor too. An exit clause. I am not getting trapped in anything because we shook hands at a tea house and felt sentimental for 10 minutes. I would expect nothing less, Ji-Hoon said, and there was something almost like respect in his voice now, buried under the exhaustion. I'll have my lawyer draft it by Friday. I'll have mine review it by Monday. Then I suppose, he said, lifting his tea like a toast, we're getting married. Don't sound so thrilled. I'm devastated, he said dryly. Truly. She laughed despite herself, a real one this time, short and surprised, and across the table Ji-Hoon watched it happen with an expression he didn't examine too closely, because examining it would have meant admitting something neither of them was ready to admit, that somewhere between the coffee stain and the tea house, the worst idea either of them had ever heard had started to feel, very quietly, like it might not be the worst idea after all. The contract was 11 pages long by the time both lawyers finished with it. Amara read every clause twice. Ji-Hoon read every clause 3 times, which she found unbearably typical of him, and told him so, and he informed her that unbearably typical was rich coming from a woman who had highlighted clause 7 in 4 different colors. Color coding is a skill, she said. It's a personality disorder. It's why I'm winning a chairmanship and you're still arguing about a folder from 2 weeks ago. You're never going to let that go, are you? Never. They signed on a Thursday afternoon in his lawyer's office in Yeonton, both of them silent and oddly formal as the pen moved across the final page, like the gravity of what they were doing had only just caught up to the joke of how it started. Neither of them noticed, because why would they, because nobody ever notices the page they don't read carefully, that the lawyer's assistant, a nervous young associate named Min-Jun who had been awake for 31 hours on 3 different filings, had accidentally stapled a second document behind the marriage contract that afternoon. An official one. A real one. The kind filed with the Suwon district registry, not locked in a private drawer. He meant to remove it before submission. He told himself he would double-check it in the morning. He forgot. By the time anyone noticed, the wedding was already 3 weeks away, the invitations were already printed, and Amara Chidinma and Ji-Hoon Kong were about to find out that some mistakes don't wait politely for you to catch them. Some mistakes go straight to the registry and make themselves permanent. Halmoni Kong had been sitting up in her hospital bed for exactly 40 minutes, refusing her medication, refusing her soup, refusing every nurse who came near her, because her grandson had just told her he was getting married in 3 weeks and she had decided, with the stubbornness of a woman who had survived 60 years of worse news than this, that she was not lying back down until she had seen a photograph of the bride. Show me, she said, for the 4th time, holding her phone out toward Ji-Hoon like a queen demanding tribute. Halmoni, I don't have a. You proposed to a woman you don't have a picture of? It happened fast. Clearly. Amara, sitting stiffly in the plastic chair beside the hospital bed, raised her hand like a student in trouble. I'm right here, actually. Halmoni turned to look at her properly for the first time, and Amara watched the old woman's sharp eyes move from her face down to her hands and back up again, the kind of assessment that made Amara feel like she was being scanned for barcodes. You're very tall, Halmoni said. I get that a lot. And very black. I get that a lot too. Ji-Hoon made a strangled sound somewhere between a cough and a plea for the floor to open. Halmoni. What? I'm not being rude. I'm making an observation. Black, tall, and she's not running away from my grandson, which means either she's very patient or very desperate. Which one is it? Honestly? Amara said, deciding in that instant that lying to this woman was both impossible and unwise. A little of both. Your grandson is exhausting. Halmoni laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, the kind that turned into a cough and made Ji-Hoon lunge for the water cup on the side table, fussing over her in a way Amara hadn't seen from him before, gentle and quick and completely unguarded. I like her, Halmoni announced, once she'd caught her breath, as if this settled a matter of national importance. She's honest. You never bring me honest people, Ji-Hoon. You bring me architects. Architects lie for a living. They tell you a building won't fall down. That's structural engineering, not lying. Same thing. Halmoni waved a hand and turned back to Amara, suddenly serious in a way that made the room feel smaller. Will you take care of him? He doesn't eat properly. He works too much. He thinks if he's busy enough, he won't notice that he's lonely. Amara opened her mouth to give the rehearsed answer, the contract answer, the it's only 3 months answer, and found, to her own surprise, that what came out instead was, I'll try. It wasn't a lie exactly. It also wasn't entirely the truth they'd agreed on. Ji-Hoon glanced at her sideways, something unreadable crossing his face, and neither of them mentioned it again. If Halmoni Kong was the easy half of the family equation, Amara's mother was the considerably harder one. Adiz Chidinma did not do surprise engagements. She did not do whirlwind anything. She had built Chidinma Logistics Africa from 3 trucks and a single warehouse in Lagos into a continental operation with a Korean expansion office, and she had done it by trusting absolutely nothing that arrived without paperwork, references, and at minimum 2 background checks. So when Amara called to say she was engaged to a Korean architect she'd known for 2.5 weeks, there was a silence on the line so long that Amara checked twice to see if the call had dropped. Say that again, her mother said finally. Mom. Say that again. Amara said it again, slower, and braced herself. Is this about the chairmanship vote? Direct hit. Amara should have known better than to think she could get anything past her mother, who had built an empire partly out of an almost supernatural ability to smell a strategy from 3,000 miles away. It's about a lot of things. It's about the board wanting personal stability and you deciding the fastest way to manufacture some is to marry a stranger. It wasn't a question. Adiz didn't really ask questions, she made statements and waited to see if you'd correct her. Amara never could. He's not exactly a stranger anymore. You've known him for 17 days. 18, actually. Amara. Mom, I need this. You know what they said about me at the last review. Promising, but unproven in her personal life. As if my personal life has anything to do with shipping routes. As if Uncle Emeka's 3 divorces ever stopped anyone from handing him a board seat. There was another pause, shorter this time, and when her mother spoke again her voice had changed, gone quieter, the boardroom edge softened into something almost careful. I'm not angry that you're playing the game, Adiz said. I'm angry that the game exists. But I need you to understand something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just nod at the phone like you're doing right now. I'm not nodding. You're nodding. She was, in fact, nodding. Marriage on paper is still marriage, her mother said. Once you sign it, it doesn't care what your intentions were. It becomes real to everyone around you whether you meant it that way or not. People will build their trust in you on top of it. His grandmother already has. Don't let this become a thing you can't put back the way it was. Amara wanted to say there was a contract. An exit clause. A clean, 3-month plan with boundaries highlighted in 4 different colors. She wanted to say it was completely under control. Instead she said, "I'll be careful," which was the closest thing to a lie she'd told her mother in years, mostly because she genuinely believed it when she said it. The wedding itself was held at a small traditional hanok venue on the edge of Suwon, chosen because it photographed beautifully and required, mercifully, the least amount of planning time of anywhere they'd looked. 60 guests. A handful of Ji-Hoon's colleagues from the firm. Amara's mother and 2 cousins flown in specially, looking simultaneously proud and deeply suspicious in matching expressions that made Amara nervous every time she caught sight of them in the crowd. Halmoni, against every doctor's recommendation, sitting in a wheelchair near the front in a hanbok she'd insisted on wearing herself, refusing help from anyone, glowing in a way that made the entire fraud feel both completely justified and somehow much worse. It was, against every expectation either of them had walking in, a genuinely beautiful ceremony, right up until the exact moment it almost wasn't. Because standing near the back, in an immaculate charcoal suit, sipping champagne he had absolutely not been invited to drink, was a man named Hyun-woo Bae, Ji-Hoon's third cousin twice removed on his late father's side, a minor shareholder in the family architecture firm, and, far more relevantly, the man Amara would later learn was the single most aggressive contender for the very chairmanship seat she was competing for back in South Africa, having quietly acquired a controlling minority stake in a rival logistics partner 2 years earlier specifically to leverage his way onto the same shortlist. Neither Amara nor Ji-Hoon had any idea, walking down that aisle hand in hand, performing vows neither of them fully believed yet, that the man clapping politely in the third row already suspected something was wrong. He'd heard the rumor, everyone in their overlapping business circles had, because Suwon's elite were significantly smaller and gossipier than either of them gave it credit for, that the famously private architect Kang Ji-Hoon had gotten engaged within weeks of meeting a foreign businesswoman currently up for a major board position back in Africa. The timing alone was suspicious. The speed was suspicious. Hyun-woo Bae had not gotten where he was by ignoring things that were suspicious. He raised his glass when the officiant pronounced them married, smiled along with the rest of the room, and quietly began making a list in his head of every detail he intended to verify. The reception was where the comedy, mercifully, returned. "You're supposed to feed me the cake gently," Amara hissed through her teeth, smile fixed in place for the cameras, as Ji-Hoon approached with a forkful of red velvet like he was defusing a bomb. "It's tradition. It's romantic. It's a choking hazard if I'm not careful." "Just put it near my mouth, Ji-Hoon." "I am putting it near your mouth." "You're aiming for my ear." "I have excellent aim, actually, you said so yourself." That was about coffee, not cake, and also it was an insult. The fork connected with her cheek instead of her mouth, leaving a small smear of frosting just under her eye, and the photographer, delighted, completely unaware this was anything but adorable newlywed clumsiness, captured the exact moment Amara's polite smile cracked into a real, furious laugh as she grabbed a napkin and pointed it at him like a weapon. "You did that on purpose." "I would never." "You absolutely would." "In my defense," he said, fighting his own smile now, the careful architect composure slipping fully for the first time all day, "you did ruin my career documents with coffee, so I consider us roughly even." "That was an accident." "This was also an accident." "You're a terrible liar." "I'm an excellent liar." "You're just an excellent detective." Across the room, Hyun-woo Bae watched the exchange with sharp, careful eyes, noting the way the bride wiped frosting off her cheek while laughing, the way the groom's hand found the small of her back almost without him seeming to notice he'd done it, filing all of it away, not as evidence of romance, but as evidence of performance, because to a man who had spent his entire career reading rooms for weakness, things that looked too natural sometimes looked that way because they'd been carefully rehearsed. He had no way of knowing, watching them, that they hadn't rehearsed any of it at all. 3 days after the wedding, the first government letter arrived. It came to the new joint address Ji-Hoon and Amara had set up, a modern 2-bedroom apartment in Yeongtong, close to his firm and a reasonable 30-minute drive from the Suwon expansion office where Amara now spent most of her days, and it sat unopened on the kitchen counter for almost a full week, because both of them assumed it was simply routine paperwork related to her residency visa transfer. It was Ji-Hoon who finally opened it, on a Tuesday evening, while reheating leftover japchae and half listening to Amara on a call with her assistant about supply chain numbers, and it was Ji-Hoon who went very, very quiet. "What?" Amara said, ending her call the moment she saw his face. He held the letter out without a word. It was from the Suwon City Registry, a routine notice confirming the registration of marriage between Kang Ji-Hoon and Chidinma Amara, listing them, in clean official print, as legally and permanently wed under the laws of the Republic of Korea, not the private contract they'd signed at the lawyer's office, not the carefully constructed fiction with boundaries and exit clauses and an end date highlighted in 4 colors, but a real, registered, government-recognized marriage. "This has to be a mistake," Amara said, reading it 3 times like the words might rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. "We signed a private agreement. This is supposed to be separate. This is supposed to not exist." "It exists," Ji-Hoon said quietly. "It clearly, very officially exists. Call the lawyer. It's 9 at night. I don't care if it's 3 in the morning, Ji-Hoon, call him right now. Because either this is a clerical error that gets fixed tomorrow with 1 phone call, or we're actually married," he said. "Really married. Not the kind we agreed to." The kitchen went silent except for the soft bubbling of the japchae they'd both completely forgotten about, and somewhere outside an ambulance siren rose and faded into the Suwon night, and Amara sat down very slowly at the counter, staring at a piece of paper that had just rewritten the entire careful plan she'd built her career's last desperate move around. 6 weeks, she said finally, almost to herself. "I have 6 weeks until the chairmanship vote. If word gets out that there's any irregularity in my marriage, any irregularity at all, the board will use it. They've been waiting for a reason. This is exactly the kind of thing Hyunwoo-bae would." She stopped. Ji-Hoon looked up. "Who?" "Your cousin. The one who cornered me at the reception asking very specific questions about our whirlwind romance and how exactly we met. I thought he was just being nosy." "He's not just nosy," Ji-Hoon said slowly, something cold settling into his voice. "He's been trying to get onto a logistics board for 2 years. If he finds out this marriage started as a business arrangement, he'll use it to destroy both of us." They looked at each other across the kitchen counter, 2 people who, 3 weeks ago, had been strangers fighting over a table, who had built an entire careful structure of boundaries and contracts specifically to avoid exactly this kind of entanglement, and who now found themselves not only accidentally, legally married, but bound together by a secret that, if it got out at the wrong moment, in front of the wrong people, could end both of their careers in the same breath. "We can't tell anyone," Amara said. "Not Halmoni," Ji-Hoon agreed immediately. "If she finds out it was ever fake, even for a second, it would break her heart. And if your board finds out before the vote, it's over. Completely over." Amara pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to think, trying to find the version of this where it all still worked out. "So what do we do?" Ji-Hoon was quiet for a long moment, turning the registry letter over in his hands like it might offer a different answer on the back. "We stay married," he said finally. "For real, on paper, exactly as it already is. We don't correct it. We don't tell anyone it was a mistake. We just," he paused, searching for the word. "We just keep living like it was always the plan." "For how long?" "Until it's safe to undo. Until your vote is over and Halmoni is stronger. A year, maybe." "A year," Amara repeated, like the word itself was unbelievable. "Living together. As an actual married couple. With your suspicious cousin watching our every move, trying to catch us in a lie that's somehow now true." "When you say it like that, it does sound worse." "It is worse, Ji-Hoon. It's so much worse. Do you have a better plan?" She didn't. That was the worst part. She sat at the counter with a government letter in front of her and a man she'd known for barely a month sitting across from her, and the only plan either of them had left was to keep pretending it's something that, as of that letter, was no longer pretend at all. "Fine," she said finally. 1 year. We make it look real. We don't get caught. We don't get caught, he agreed. Neither of them said the other thing sitting quietly underneath that agreement, the thing about the way his hand had found the small of her back without him noticing, the thing about the way she'd told his grandmother I'll try and meant it more than the contract required, because saying it out loud felt far more dangerous than any registry letter possibly could. What neither of them knew, as they sat there making their new, more complicated plan, was that across town, Hyunwoo Bae had already placed a phone call to a private investigator he'd used twice before for far less interesting matters, and had given him a single, simple instruction. Find out everything about how Kang Ji-Hoon and Chidinma Amara really met. You used my toothbrush. Ji-Hoon stood in the bathroom doorway at 6:15 in the morning holding the offending toothbrush like forensic evidence, and Amara, half asleep and wrapped in a towel, did not even have the decency to look ashamed. Mine fell in the sink. It was an emergency. That's disgusting. I rinsed it. That makes it worse, somehow. You knew it was a problem and you proceeded anyway. You're being dramatic. It's a toothbrush, not a crime scene. In my family, Ji-Hoon said, setting it down with the exaggerated care of a man defusing a small explosive, we consider personal hygiene items sacred. In my family, we consider being 2 months married and still arguing about toothbrushes a sign that someone needs to relax. It had been 6 weeks since the registry letter. 6 weeks of careful, deliberate domestic performance that had, somewhere between the third grocery store argument about whose turn it was to cook and the second time Amara fell asleep on the couch reviewing contracts while Ji-Hoon quietly draped a blanket over her without saying anything about it the next morning, stopped feeling entirely like performance. The apartment in Yongtong had rules now, unspoken ones, the kind that accumulate between two people sharing space whether or not either of them planned on it. Ji-Hoon's side of the closet stayed military precise, Amara's side looked, in his words, like a typhoon had specific grievances. She made coffee every morning and he drank it without complaint despite claiming, loudly and often, that her coffee-to-water ratio violated several laws of physics. He started leaving sticky notes on the fridge with her meeting schedule because she kept forgetting which video calls were with Seoul and which were with Johannesburg, and she pretended this annoyed her while secretly keeping every single note in a drawer instead of throwing them away. I have a site visit today, Ji-Hoon said, abandoning the toothbrush argument with visible effort. The community center renovation. You should come. You keep saying you want to understand what I actually do all day instead of, and I quote, draw squares and call it art. I stand by that description. Come anyway. I have a board call at 2. The site visit is at 10. You have time. She looked at him for a moment, toothbrush controversy forgotten, something soft moving behind her eyes that she didn't examine too closely. Fine. But if you make me wear a hard hat, I want it known that I will look incredible in it, and you'll have to live with that. I can live with that, he said, and the way he said it, quiet, almost too easy, made something shift in the room that neither of them named out loud. The community center site was half finished, all exposed beams and scaffolding and the particular organized chaos of a building mid-transformation, and watching Ji-Hoon move through it was, Amara had to admit to absolutely no one, genuinely impressive. He spoke to the construction foreman in rapid Korean, switched to careful, patient English for the two visiting consultants, crouched down to check a measurement against his tablet with the kind of focus she recognized from her own work, the focus of someone who actually cared whether the thing they built would last. You're staring, he said, not looking up from the tablet. I'm supervising. You don't know anything about construction. I know if a wall looks crooked. That one looks crooked. It's not crooked, it's a load-bearing angle, there's a difference. It looks crooked, Ji-Hoon. He finally looked up, exasperated and fighting a smile in the way that had become, somewhere in the last 6 weeks, distressingly familiar to her. Do you want to design the community center, or do you want to let the architect do his job? I want the wall to not fall on the children who will eventually use this building. It is structurally sound. Says the man who once let coffee destroy 3 months of work. That was your fault. We've discussed this. It was an accident on both our parts, equally. It was 80% your fault. 60, maximum. He laughed, that same short, surprised bark from the coffee shop, except now it didn't surprise either of them anymore. Now it was just a sound the apartment had gotten used to, and reached out without thinking to brush a streak of dust off her cheek, and the moment his fingers touched her skin they both went still, very suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the construction noise around them had somehow gone quiet in a way it definitely hadn't actually done, and for one long second neither of them moved. Then his phone rang, shattering it, and he stepped back fast enough that the foreman gave him a curious look, and Amara busied herself very intensely with examining a stack of bricks that did not need examining. Neither of them mentioned it on the drive home. Both of them thought about nothing else. That same afternoon, in a different part of Suwon entirely, Hyunwoo Bae sat across from a private investigator named Park in a quiet corner of a hotel lobby cafe, sliding a manila folder across the table with the satisfied air of a man who'd just been handed exactly what he'd been hoping for. "Tell me you found something useful," Hyunwoo said. Park opened the folder. "The lawyer's office that drafted the original agreement has a junior associate, Minjun, 26 years old. Sloppy paperwork habits, according to 2 former co-workers I spoke with. He left the firm 3 weeks ago, citing personal reasons. Convenient timing. There's more." Park slid a printed email across the table, a forwarded message between 2 paralegals discussing a filing irregularity on the Kongchidinma matter, vague enough to mean almost anything to anyone who didn't already suspect something, but Hyunwoo wasn't anyone, and he read between every line twice. "This confirms it," he said. There was a separate document. A private one. Something that wasn't meant to go to the registry. I can't prove what was in it. I don't need you to prove it. I need enough threads that when I pull them, in front of the right people, the whole thing comes apart on its own. Hyunwoo closed the folder, satisfaction settling into his expression like a man finally seeing a long game pay off. "When is the chairmanship vote?" 5 weeks, according to the public board notice. Then we have 5 weeks to make sure everyone in that room understands exactly what kind of marriage Ms. Chidinma actually has. The first real crack appeared at a dinner Hyunwoo orchestrated with surgical precision 2 weeks later, a family gathering he insisted on hosting himself, framed as a kind gesture to welcome the new bride properly into the extended Kong family, held at an upscale Korean barbecue restaurant in downtown Suwon with exactly the right mix of relatives, business associates, and one very specific guest Amara didn't recognize until he was already seated directly across from her. "This is my colleague, Mr. Yoon," Hyunwoo said smoothly, gesturing at the stranger with the easy charm of a man who had rehearsed this introduction several times in a mirror. "He works in legal compliance. I thought it might be useful for Amara to meet more of our professional circle, since she's settling into Suwon life now." "How thoughtful," Amara said, smiling the particular smile she reserved for board meetings with people she didn't trust. Across the table, Ji-Hoon's hand found hers under the tablecloth, a small, steady pressure that said "I see what he's doing too" without either of them needing to say it aloud. Mr. Yoon waited until the second course, until the wine had loosened the table's conversation into something looser and louder, before he asked, with perfectly calibrated casualness, "So how exactly did you 2 meet?" "I love a good origin story." "A coffee shop," Ji-Hoon said smoothly. "She ruined my documents. I've never recovered." A ripple of polite laughter went around the table. Hyunwoo did not laugh. "And the engagement happened so quickly after that," Mr. Yoon continued, still smiling, still casual, still very obviously not actually casual at all. "Must have been quite the whirlwind. I heard there was even some confusion with the paperwork, a duplicate filing, or something of that nature? Legal compliance gossip, you understand. We hear everything." The table went very slightly quiet. Amara felt her pulse pick up under her composed expression, felt Ji-Hoon's grip on her hand tighten by a fraction nobody else would notice. "Paperwork can be tedious," Amara said lightly, reaching for her wine glass with a hand she willed steady. "I assume you've seen worse in compliance than a slow registry office." "Of course," Mr. Yoon said, smiling wider now, like a man who'd gotten exactly the reaction he'd come for, not an answer, but a flinch, small and quick and real, the kind only someone watching closely enough would catch. I only ask because these things tend to matter, don't they? Especially for someone in your position. Boards do love stability. They love it even more when there's nothing underneath it worth questioning. He raised his glass slightly in her direction, a gesture that looked, to everyone else at the table, like a friendly toast. It did not feel like a toast to Amara at all. It felt like a warning shot. He knows something, Amara said the moment they were back in the car, the warmth of the dinner gone the instant the restaurant doors closed behind them. That wasn't a coincidence. That wasn't small talk. That man knew exactly what to ask and exactly how to ask it. I know. Ji-Hoon's jaw was tight, both hands on the wheel, none of the easy humor from the construction site anywhere in his expression now. Hyunwoo's been circling this for weeks. I should have seen it sooner. He's never once invited me to a family dinner in 3 years. The timing isn't a coincidence either. What does he actually have? Real proof, or just suspicion? I don't know. But he doesn't need proof, Amara, not really. He just needs enough doubt in the right rooms at the right time. A whisper to the board before your vote. A quiet word to Halmoni's doctors about stress levels and family honesty. He doesn't need to win the truth. He just needs to make everyone uncertain enough to hesitate. Amara stared out the window at the lights of Suwon sliding past, thinking of her mother's voice on the phone weeks earlier. Once you sign it, it doesn't care what your intentions were, and felt, for the first time since the registry letter, genuinely frightened. I won't let him do this to Halmoni, she said quietly. Whatever happens with the vote, whatever happens to either of us, she does not get hurt by this. I mean that. Ji-Hoon glanced over at her at the red light, something in his face shifting, softening, the careful architect composure cracking the way it had been cracking, slowly, for weeks now. I know you mean it, he said. That's exactly the problem. What problem? The problem, he said, eyes back on the road as the light turned green, is that 3 months ago I would have believed you were saying that because of the contract. Because it benefits the arrangement. And now I just believe you because it's true. And I don't know what to do with that. Amara didn't answer right away. She didn't trust her own voice to come out steady. We should focus on Hyunwoo, she said finally, which was true, and also the safest thing available to say. Right, Ji-Hoon agreed. Hyunwoo. Neither of them moved the conversation any further than that. Both of them sat with it the rest of the drive home, the silence between them no longer the cold, irritated silence of two strangers who'd argued over a coffee table, but something else entirely, something that felt dangerously, terrifyingly close to honest. They didn't have long to sit with it. 3 days later, while Amara was in the middle of finalizing a presentation for the chairmanship board, 5 weeks out now, every detail mattering more than the last, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, a Suwon area code, and a voice she did, the moment he spoke. Ms. Chidinma, Mr. Yoon said pleasantly. I do hope I'm not interrupting. How did you get this number? Compliance work has its uses. A pause, the sound of him settling into something he clearly considered a pleasant task. I wanted to give you the courtesy of a warning, professional to professional. There's a private investigation report circulating, quietly, for now, among certain board members regarding the precise circumstances of your marriage. The original paperwork. The lawyer's office. A young associate who left rather suddenly. I'm sure you understand the kind of conclusions people draw when they see those particular dots laid out next to each other. Amara's stomach dropped straight through the floor. That report is being shared with the board, she said slowly. Before the vote. I believe the plan is to present it the morning of the vote, actually, Mr. Yoon said, almost gently, almost like he regretted it, though nothing in his voice actually suggested he did. Maximum impact, I'm told. I thought you deserved to know that it's coming. Consider it a professional courtesy. Why would you tell me this? You're working with him. Let's just say, Mr. Yoon said, voice dropping into something quieter, almost careful, that I find I prefer fair fights to ambushes. What you do with the warning is entirely up to you. The line went dead. Amara stood frozen in the middle of the apartment, phone still pressed to her ear long after the call had ended, staring at the wall without seeing it, doing rapid, panicked math on exactly how much time they had left and exactly how little of it would be enough. 5 weeks had just become 5 days. And somewhere across Suwon, Hyunwoo Bae was finalizing a presentation of his own, one with a single, devastating goal: to stand up in front of the entire board on the morning of the vote and reveal, in front of everyone who mattered, that Amara Chidinma's marriage had never been real at all. He had no idea, putting the final touches on his report that night, just how wrong, and how right, he actually was. Say that again. Ji-Hoon had walked through the apartment door at 9 that night to find Amara sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, laptop balanced on her knees, looking like a woman who had aged 5 years in 5 hours. The vote got moved up, she said, not looking away from the screen. Mr. Yoon was right. They're presenting Hyunwoo's report the morning of the chairmanship vote. Friday. 3 days from now. And then they vote immediately after, while everyone's still reacting, before I have any real chance to respond. Ji-Hoon dropped to the floor next to her without bothering with the chairs, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. We could tell them the truth ourselves, he said finally. Get ahead of it. Walk in Friday morning and say it plainly before he gets the chance. Yes, it started as an arrangement, yes, it became real, here's the registry proof, here's everything. Take away his ambush by handing them the truth ourselves. And if they don't believe that it became real, if they just hear fake marriage and stop listening? Then at least it's our version of the truth and not his. Amara closed the laptop slowly, finally turning to look at him. Your grandmother. What about her? If this becomes public, even our version of it, even the honest version, it's still going to reach her eventually. Someone will tell her it started as a lie. I don't care how it ends. I care that she hears started as a lie before she hears anything else, and I am not doing that to her, Ji-Hoon. Not after everything. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he finally spoke, his voice had gone rough in a way she hadn't heard from him before. She already knows, he said. Amara went very still. What? I told her last week. After the dinner with Hyunwoo, after Mr. Yoon's call, I knew this was coming eventually, and I couldn't let her hear it from a stranger. So I told her everything. How we met. The contract. The mistake at the registry. All of it. Ji-Hoon. How could you not tell me you did that? Because I didn't know how it would go, and I didn't want to scare you before I knew. What did she say? For the first time all evening, something that wasn't quite a smile moved across his face, tired, and complicated, and warm underneath all of it. She laughed, he said. She laughed for almost a full minute, and then she said, and I'm translating loosely, I've known something was strange about you too since the hospital. You looked at each other like you wanted to throw plates, not flowers. But you came back. Every single day, for months, you came back, even after you didn't have to. Real or not real on paper, that part was never fake. Then she told me if I let you walk away over a piece of government paperwork, she would come back from the dead specifically to haunt me. Amara felt something break loose in her chest, half a laugh, half something far more dangerous than a laugh. She's not angry. She's furious we lied to her in the first place. She made that extremely clear. But angry about the marriage itself? He shook his head. No. I think she knew before we did. That's terrifying. She's a terrifying woman. It's how she survived a fish market for 11 years. Amara laughed properly this time, leaning her head briefly against his shoulder before she caught herself, before the easy comfort of it registered as something neither of them had officially agreed to allow, except 3 months into a marriage that had stopped being fake somewhere around a community center construction site and a toothbrush argument, agreements didn't seem to mean quite what they used to. Friday, she said finally. We walk in together. We tell the truth before he gets the chance to twist it. And whatever happens with the vote happens. Together, Ji-Hoon agreed, and reached for her hand on the kitchen floor like it was the most natural thing in the world, because by then, it was. The boardroom at the Suwon offices of Chidinma Logistics Africa was full by 8:50 on Friday morning, every chair occupied, the air thick with the particular tension of people who knew something was about to happen but didn't yet know what. Hyunwoo Bae arrived at 8:55, sharp and composed in a charcoal suit nearly identical to the one he'd worn to the wedding, manila folder tucked under his arm, the satisfied confidence of a man who believed he'd already won, settling into every step. He had not expected Amara and Ji-Hoon to already be seated when he walked in. Together. Calm. Hands loosely linked on the table between them in a way that made his confident smile falter, just slightly, for half a second before he smoothed it back into place. Before we begin the formal vote, the board chairman said, an older woman named Director CO with the kind of weary authority that suggested decades of cutting through exactly this sort of theater, I understand Mr. Bae has requested time to present information relevant to a candidate's standing. Mr. Bae, the floor is yours. Briefly, please. Hyunwoo rose, smoothing his jacket, opening his folder with the unhurried precision of a man who had rehearsed this exact moment dozens of times in his head. Director CO, members of the board, I want to begin by saying I take no pleasure in this. He did not sound like a man taking no pleasure in it. But I believe this board deserves transparency before casting a vote that affects the future of this company. I have reason to believe, strong reason, supported by documentation, that Ms. Chidinma's marriage to Mr. Kong was not a genuine union, but a calculated arrangement entered into specifically to manufacture the appearance of personal stability this board has stated it values. A fake marriage, designed to manipulate this vote. A murmur moved through the room. Several board members exchanged glances. Director CO's expression didn't shift at all, which somehow made the silence worse. I have a sworn account, Hyunwoo continued, riding the murmur like a wave, from a former legal associate confirming a private contract was drawn up between the two parties prior to the wedding, a contract outlining a temporary arrangement, financial terms, and an exit clause. I have email correspondence confirming a filing irregularity at the registry office. I believe, when this board examines the full timeline, it will become clear that Ms. Chidinma's marriage exists on paper alone, manufactured for exactly the kind of board approval being sought today. He set the folder down on the table with a small, deliberate sound, the period at the end of his sentence. I yield the floor, he said, to Ms. Chidinma, if she wishes to respond. The room turned toward her. Amara stood slowly, feeling Ji-Hoon's hand release hers under the table, not in retreat but in something closer to support, the way you let go of someone's hand right before they need both of theirs free. Everything Mr. Bae just said, Amara began, is true. The murmur this time was louder, sharper, several board members actually sitting forward in their chairs, and across the table Hyunwoo's careful composure broke into something close to open triumph. A contract was drawn up, Amara continued, voice steady even as her pulse hammered. 3 months, a public arrangement, an exit clause, every word of it true. Ji-Hoon and I met in a coffee shop arguing over a table, and 3 weeks later we agreed to marry each other for entirely practical reasons. He needed his grandmother to see him married before she passed. I needed this board to stop deciding my competence based on my relationship status. She let that land, watching 2 of the older board members shift uncomfortably. We are not proud of why it started. But Mr. Bae's report stops exactly where the story actually becomes relevant to this room. She nodded once, and Ji-Hoon stood beside her, opening a folder of his own. Due to a clerical error at the registry, one made by an overworked junior associate, documented and confirmed by the firm in question, what was meant to be a private contract was filed as an official marriage, Ji-Hoon said. By the time we discovered it, undoing it quietly would have raised exactly the kind of questions Mr. Bae is raising today, at a time that would have devastated both my dying grandmother and Ms. Chidinma's career. So we made a choice. We stayed married. Not because the paperwork demanded it. Because somewhere in those weeks, living in the same apartment, fighting over toothbrushes and crooked walls and bad coffee ratios, a few people actually laughed, surprised. Despite the tension in the room, it stopped being an arrangement. It became a marriage we both wanted to keep. That's a convenient story, Hyunwoo cut in, sharper now, his composure fully cracked. Easy to claim love after the fact, once you've been caught. I'd agree with you, came a new voice from the doorway, except I happen to have been watching this unfold for 3 months, and I am neither easy to fool nor easy to lie to. Every head in the room turned. Halmoni Kong stood in the doorway in a wheelchair pushed by a startled nurse who had clearly lost an argument about hospital discharge somewhere along the way, dressed in the same hanbok she'd worn to the wedding, her sharp eyes sweeping the room until they landed directly on Hyunwoo Bae. Halmoni. Ji-Hoon was halfway out of his seat. You shouldn't be here, you should be resting. I will rest when I am finished, she said, in clipped, precise English that made it clear she had understood every word of Hyunwoo's presentation, embarrassing this young man in front of his entire board. She wheeled herself further into the room, ignoring everyone's stunned faces, stopping directly in front of Hyunwoo Bae. I knew you, you know. Your father's funeral. You stood near the back the whole time, calculating who would inherit what before the body was even in the ground. I remember faces like that. Hyunwoo's jaw tightened. Mrs. Kong, with respect, this is a business matter. This is my grandson's marriage, she snapped, and I will speak about it in any room I choose. Yes, it began as a lie. My grandson told me himself, 2 weeks ago, because he is, despite everything, an honest man who could not bear lying to me any longer. Do you know what I told him? The room was dead silent. I told him I didn't care how it started, Halmoni said. I have buried a husband, raised a grandson alone, and watched enough real marriages fall apart from people who meant every word on their wedding day to know that the beginning means nothing. What matters is whether 2 people choose each other, every single difficult day after. She turned, slow and deliberate, to face the board directly. This woman has sat by my hospital bed at midnight reading me letters because my eyes were too tired. She has argued with my grandson about toothbrushes and crooked walls in a way that has made an old woman laugh harder than she has in years. If your board cannot recognize a real marriage when it is standing directly in front of you, then perhaps the problem with this company's judgment runs considerably deeper than one candidate's wedding. Director CO, who had not said a single word through the entire exchange, finally leaned forward, looking directly at Hyunwoo Bae with an expression that had gone from neutral to something considerably colder. Mr. Bae, she said, you brought us a private investigation into a board candidate's marriage, built almost entirely on a fired associate's account and an out-of-context email. You did not bring us anything that contradicts what we've just heard, you brought us the beginning of a story and presented it as the whole story, hoping we wouldn't ask for the ending. She closed his folder for him, sliding it firmly back across the table. I find myself wondering, Mr. Bae, what exactly you stood to gain from this board believing the worst about Ms. Chidinma 3 days before a vote that decides who replaces our chairman. I find myself wondering that very specifically, given your own minority stake in a competing logistics partner. The color drained slowly out of Hyunwoo's face as several board members turned to look at him with a new, distinctly unfriendly kind of attention. That has nothing to do with. It has everything to do with it, Director CO said. We will be reviewing your conduct separately. Please sit down, Mr. Bae. He sat down. He did not say another word for the rest of the meeting. The vote, when it finally happened 20 minutes later, was not close. Amara stood in the hallway afterward, still slightly unsteady, replaying the entire morning in fragments too fast to fully process, when Ji-Hoon found her by the window, 2 cups of vending machine coffee in his hands, holding one out to her with the same careful seriousness he'd held that ruined folder 3 months earlier. Lid included this time, he said. I learned. She laughed, took it, and let the silence stretch for a moment, watching the Suwon morning through the glass. Chairwoman, he said, testing the word. Don't. It suits you. I'm aware. You're shaking. I am absolutely not shaking. He took the coffee back out of her visibly trembling hands and set both cups down on the windowsill, and before she could protest, before either of them could think of a single practical, contractual, sensible reason not to, he kissed her, right there in the hallway, in front of the glass wall of the boardroom, in front of anyone who happened to be walking past, the way neither of them had quite managed to admit they'd wanted to for weeks. It was, by any objective measure, a terrible time and place for it. Neither of them cared even slightly. They held the second wedding 4 months later, in early spring, at the same small hanok venue in Suwon, though this time the guest list was longer and the planning considerably less rushed, and the bride wore a color her mother had picked specifically because, in Ji Chidinma's exact words, "If you're doing this again, you're doing it properly." Halmoni sat in the front row again, out of the wheelchair this time, standing with the help of a cane and Ji-Hoon's steady arm for as long as her strength allowed, refusing every offer to sit down until the vows were finished. This time, the officiant asked, "Do you, Amara, take Ji-Hoon, knowing exactly who he is, exactly how exhausting he can be about crooked walls and toothbrushes?" A ripple of laughter moved through the guests, because by now everyone who mattered knew the whole story, to be your husband, fully and completely, with no contract and no exit clause? "I do," Amara said. "Properly this time." "And do you, Ji-Hoon, take Amara, knowing she will spill things on important documents for the rest of your life?" "I do," he said, before the officiant even finished the sentence. "I've never been more certain of anything." Somewhere near the back, holding hands with the husband she'd long since stopped pretending to be unmoved around, even director Seo dabbed quietly at her eyes, and Hyun Woo Bae's name, mercifully, was never mentioned at all that day, because some people simply don't deserve a place in the ending of a story they tried so hard to ruin. They kissed, married for real this time, not because a registry had made a mistake or a board demanded stability or a dying woman needed a wedding to hold on to, but because, somewhere between a ruined folder and a hospital bed and a crooked wall and 1,000 small, stubborn arguments, two people who had never planned on loving each other had gone and done exactly that anyway. And Halmoni Kong, standing in the front row in her hanbok, watching her grandson kiss his wife under the spring sun, leaned over to Amara's mother and said, in English clear enough for everyone nearby to hear, "I told you. I knew before they did." And that's the full story, from a coffee shop argument in Suwon to a real wedding nobody saw coming. If you loved this one, let me know in the comments which part hit you hardest, and make sure you're subscribed to Afro-K Storyverse, because there's a brand new story dropping soon and you do not want to miss it. Until next time.